It's easy to, and often important, to talk in terms of numbers and empiricism and generality, zooming out, looking at the data, crucial. But sometimes if we only do that, we can lose sight of the humanity, of the stories that these data sets really represent. And so I want to tap into that and show you some reporting from NBC News where you see the reaction of someone learning that because of the unlawful actions of shutting down unilaterally without congressional approval an organization within our government, the Trump administration has come close to ruining someone's and many people's lives. We'll talk about that video in just a second here. First, though, updates before getting to it. To contextualize, the CNN reports that USAID IG fired day after report critical of impacts of Trump administration's dismantling of the agency. Essentially, what this goes on to explain is that the Inspector General of the U.S. Agency for International Development was another person who just recently, without the legally mandated notice, 30 days notice to Congress, was removed, which is not how the process is supposed to go. They're not abiding by the law as written. But why did they get this guy removed? Well, he was raising concern about how, as I'll give you the specifics of a little bit later in the segment, the chaotic nature of the shutting down of USAID is actually wasting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of food, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of taxpayer dollars, even though, of course, this is supposed to be a cost-saving initiative. We'll look at that in just a second. First, though, a reminder, founded in 1961, USAID has until now worked in more than 100 countries, promoting global health, fighting epidemics and starvation, providing treatment for people with HIV/AIDS, educating children, and combating child sex trafficking, resettling refugees and supplying shelter to displaced people across the globe, and supporting programs in maternal and child health and anti-corruption work. With that being said, let's hear or watch a story of someone being notified of this. This is a woman in South Africa. If you appreciate the show, please do click the subscribe button. We have a lot to go through in this segment, a lot of crucial updates. Please do stick around for it.
Are you trying to go to the clinic?
Yeah.
It's closed.
What happened?
I mean, the USAID funding has been frozen, so they're closing down clinics.
I don't know what to do. Serious. What will I do? There's nothing.
Clinics like this are a lifeline for people in this community, especially women suffering from HIV. This one, now shut, is a huge disappointment for people just trying to stay alive.
Lives will be lost. As experts and members of USAID, or former members now, have said. I'm going to remind you a little bit later of why it's so important, separate from even the humanitarian reasons, why it's so important in our interest to invest in programs like this, life-saving programs. But first, I mentioned to you the waste that the Inspector General, who's now been pushed out in a way that is against the law, the person who's supposed to hold accountable the policymakers and the policy implementers, he's been pushed out because he dared to bring up that this quote-unquote cost-saving initiative is actually wasting necessary life-saving funds.
Of boxes in a warehouse in Savannah, Georgia. They say enough packaged food to feed hundreds of thousands of starving children in Gaza or Sudan for 6 weeks.
We've got about 300,000 pallets or cases in the building.
Not yet shipped out after USAID's stop work order 2 weeks ago.
I think right now we have about 300,000 boxes of RUTF. So a box will feed a child. It's 150 sachets, and it'll feed a child for 6 weeks, roughly, through the food aid system. So that's a lot of kids stacked up in that warehouse.
Why is it so important?
Yeah, so children that are in that condition of severely acutely malnourished, they need the vital micronutrients and the calories and the fats and the lipids poured into them. And you could do that with like a traditional infant formula, but you can imagine if you're a mom in Ethiopia or in a place where you don't have access to clean or fresh water or refrigeration, if you were to use some sort of standard formula like that, then it would go bad.
President Trump's order freezing most USAID programs was a shock to people running nonprofits like Mark Moore, to his factory workers, and potentially devastating to the families who depend on their food, says the former head of USAID.
With 1 in 4 kids under 5 in Sudan suffering from severe acute malnutrition. There is American food in warehouses that is just sitting there because of the stop work order and because of the fact that these programs have effectively been halted.
Many American farmers are also crying foul. Peanut farmers in Georgia and soybean and wheat growers in Kansas, because USAID spends $2 billion a year buying their surplus crops to feed.
And you have the negative impact being expanded on there, even of U.S. farmers. NBC reports also that a lot of people will die, how Trump's USAID overhaul could lead to famine in Sudan. You have 742 kitchens serving around 816,000 people have closed, said a spokesperson for the civilian-led emergency response rooms. And the details that we're learning is that you have all these resources, and instead of, as you heard some of there being a comprehensive approach, even if you were headed in the direction that I very much disagree with, which is shutting down USAID, even if you were heading that direction, an adult who cared about people more would structure a longer term plan for doing so, such that you don't have all of this waste of stuff that's just sitting on shelves ready to be delivered to people, but the staff have been told to stop working so they can't deliver it to people. And they don't have the funds to do so. And so it's going to be wasted. Millions and millions of dollars wasted because they want to make a show of how fast they can do this stuff. Before getting to why it's so important, reminding you of why it's so important that we support an organization like USAID, even if there's improvements that need to be made, of course, but push back against this effort and so many of the other ones. The Bulwark had an interesting piece talking about an individual, the writer's experience with USAID representatives when he was in war. David wasn't the only USAID representative I served with. Through my career, I proudly served alongside hundreds of USAID personnel. Some, like my friend Jody, served for years in Afghanistan. USAID frequently sends its employees armed only with humanitarian aid into areas the military deems too dangerous for conventional forces. It should come as no surprise that these American heroes sometimes make the ultimate sacrifice. In Afghanistan, USAID saved a lot of American lives. A lot of American lives. And then to prompt our discussion about the broader philosophy behind supporting this, here is Politico saying, as USAID retreats, China pounces. If USAID is packing up and moving out, China seems all too happy to move in. That's the trend that longtime China watchers and aid workers are already noticing in the week since President Donald Trump and his ally Elon Musk moved to dismantle and shake up the U.S. Agency for International Development. China is quickly making moves to fill in gaps left behind by the Trump administration's abrupt moves to almost entirely halt and wind down USAID operations worldwide from the Indo-Pacific to South America. So China is saying, hooray! We will try to fill some of these gaps and we will benefit from doing so. So the two big reasons that we engage in efforts, foreign aid efforts like USAID, is because, number one, the humanitarian benefits. But it's a fair question to say, all right, well, there's a lot of humanitarian problems all the time. Why would we be the ones, and why wouldn't we spend that money on ourselves? Well, we'll get to the Republican philosophy on this that is so flawed. But first, what is mine? Well, number one, you have the humanitarian benefits, but you also have, crucially, our own national interest in this, as shown by China's excitement in filling this role, immediately jumping into action. I'll give you the specifics on what China is doing in a second, but it's essentially an investment in global goodwill towards the United States. What does that mean? Well, you then have enhanced, as developing countries develop, you have enhanced relationships that can be leveraged into good trade and business relationships as those countries grow. You have countries now that have a positive attitude towards the United States, and that facilitates intelligence sharing and military scenarios. You also have the minimization of anti-American extremism globally. This is a much more cost efficient to reduce the threat of terrorism abroad, because you're fostering an environment of positive attitudes towards the United States, because people are seeing in their life how they're benefited from our presence on the world stage. One of the key reasons the United States is as wealthy and globally dominant as it is because in part we rely on a complicated web of international relationships that we've spent a century plus developing, and Trump is destroying that. One of the ways we foster these relationships as different countries become more and more present on the world stage is investments in humanitarian efforts. And by this action and so many other in our international relationships, Trump is destroying what we've cultivated. That yes, I want to leverage our wealth and our power for good by just the basic action of helping people in a humanitarian sense. But also just selfishly, we then have this global web of influence that we're constantly leveraging for our own interests. It's a part of the reason that we are, as I said, wealthy and dominant on the world stage as we are. So then the question would be, okay, but at least Republicans want to transfer that money, which in the grand scheme of our budget is a very small number, less than 1% of our budget. But they want to transfer that money to spending on Americans. Is that really so bad? Well, actually, they don't, which adds insult to injury. Instead, they're doing the opposite. While cutting crucial benefits that go abroad to folks, they want to cut crucial benefits that stay domestically for folks. Working to eliminate FEMA, Trump has announced. The Republican budget would wreak havoc on Medicaid and food stamps. Right now, it's just a proposal. We'll see if it gets through, but it seems they're very intent on doing so. Eliminating the Department of Education, which, among other things, provides obviously necessary and basic support for low-income communities educationally. Then dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an act that will prevent justice for being served whenever consumers, your average consumer who doesn't have the power to get justice when they're defrauded. They're trying to get rid of the institution that actually can step in and help get justice when powerful people rip off your average consumer. And then federally funded community health centers, PBS has reported, in at least 10 states are experiencing delays accessing their funds, forcing some to shut down and others to contemplate closures. This being in the United States, health clinics are having to shut down. People who need that support, and it's being cut off abruptly, no warning, no moment of time for people to figure out what they're going to do next. All of this happening while Republicans are pushing extensions for Trump's 2017 tax cut bill. What would that do? Well, I'll remind you of the NPR graphic here. The effects of this by 2027. You can see at the lower part of your screen is people who make a bunch of money. And the higher part of your screen is people who make less money. Folks who would need the relief are actually losing in this bargain. And people who don't need any more support are winning. So while they would never word it this way and they would call it a liberal talking point, the facts show that they're willing to trade off aid. I know it sounds like a political talking point, but really what we just went through, what is the equation they're okay with? What is the trade-off they're okay with? Trading basic benefits for health coverage, for food stamps, etc., for Americans, in addition to basic benefits that foster a pro-American environment globally and save people's lives. PEPFAR estimated to have saved 25 million lives since it was started. Trading that for tax cuts for the rich. That's really the equation. That's really the assessment that they're all right with. CNBC reports on a different topic. Trump signs order pausing enforcement of foreign bribery ban. President Donald Trump signed an executive order directing the Department of Justice to pause enforcing a nearly half-century-old law that provides American companies and foreign firms, that prohibits American companies and foreign firms from bribing officials of foreign governments to obtain or retain business. The pause is being implemented to avoid putting U.S. business at an economic disadvantage to foreign competitors. Very Very interesting set of priorities. You might be asking, how are the defenders defending these acts? Not only is the substance of the policy insane, the substance of that trade-off insane, but they're doing so through illegal means. Everything we've gone through is built on a foundation of firing people in ways you're not allowed to, of judges saying you can't freeze those funds, but they do it anyways, of shutting down agencies without congressional approval, of pretending like the Constitution doesn't clearly give Congress the power of the purse. So there's also an unconstitutional approach to un-American policies. How does someone like Scott Jennings defend this? Well, complete nonsense.
Who's going to enforce the determination?
Here's what I think is a joke. That you have these partisan hack Democrat attorney generals. They get together, and the only thing they know how to do is try to nullify the results of the last election by venue shopping these district court judges. They find the most lunatic liberals they can. They file lawsuits knowing full well they're going to try to usurp the president's authority, tie this up in court for years. Donald, I hope you're happy.
Lunatic liberal judges like a George W. Bush appointee, like a Ronald Reagan appointee, like a Donald Trump appointee, like another Ronald Reagan appointee, like another George W. Bush appointee.
But to finish my point,
all of those lunatic liberal Republican appointees.
Yeah, and look what the Republicans do.
Let me finish my point. No, but the foundation of your point we just proved to be lie. They're just finding only radical left lunatics to hear out these cases. That's why the judiciary is wrongfully claiming Trump is doing illegal things, and that's why he shouldn't have to follow these judges' rulings. And then Abby Phillip, who's been doing a great job dealing with Scott Jennings, from what I can tell recently, she says lunatic liberal judges like George W. Bush appointee, Ronald Reagan appointee, Donald Trump appointee, Ronald Reagan appointee, George Bush appointee, those are radical left lunatics that they're venue shopping for? And what is Elon Musk up to as he destroys people's lives? Trolling the media. Elon Musk wrote on X, made them say my name. What is he talking about? Well, this.
Now, the disruptor-in-chief, Elon Musk, who apparently has adopted the alias, at least he changed his social media handle to Harry Balls, tweeted this morning, democracy in America is being destroyed by...
So he finds it funny, amid all of this, to change his name to Harry Bowles so that the media has to read it. As he might do. I don't find that funny, as people's lives are literally being ruined because of his actions. Again, unconstitutional, in some cases illegal, and short-sighted. Not even planning for how they would prevent waste when they're the ones who are supposed to prevent waste, but they're wasting a bunch of food that could keep people alive by not structuring this, even if it's what they wanted to do, like an adult would. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to support the show and get members-only content, you can do it by clicking that join button below.